Honey, stop inventing things. P. Diddy is a good man and I have a great job. You're going crazy. He would never do that to you.
Jasmine Clarke is the daughter of P. Diddy's private driver and grew up around glamour and luxury, but unfortunately, she was one of the victims of the darkest schemes in the industry, led by P. Diddy. In this video, we have the opportunity to hear her story, where she tells the nightmare of being the daughter of Diddy's private driver, and she also talks about all the atrocities she suffered at the hands of the American rapper and his powerful friends. Even though Jasmine told her father everything about the things that P. Diddy did to her in the darkroom, he pretended not to believe it or ignored it to preserve his job that paid very well. What happened to Jasmine Clarke shaped her past and still affects her life to this day. Now, after years of suffering and silence, she is finally ready to reveal the darkest secrets of this scheme that no one dared expose. Before you dive into this devastating story, subscribe to the channel for more shocking stories like this and share this video to warn others about what a monster P. Diddy really is. Jasmine's story begins like this.
My name is Jasmine Clarke, and this is my story. I just ask that you don't judge me and don't say that I'm lying. I still go to therapy to this day to be able to live after everything that happened to me. My childhood was very different from most children. My father, Thomas Clarke, was the personal driver for P. Diddy, the famous rapper and producer. I grew up among luxurious cars, lush mansions, and parties full of celebrities. At that time, I thought I was lucky to be so close to this world that so many people only saw on TV. I was just a little girl, and to me, it seemed like a fairy tale. I saw familiar faces all the time. Jay-Z, Beyonce, and other big stars were always around. Parties were held almost every week, and my father was like a shadow of Diddy. He took it everywhere and made sure it was available 24 hours a day. My father said that job gave us everything: a house, food, good clothes. I believed him. At first, I believed in Diddy too. He was charismatic and always kind to me in front of others. He said I was a daughter he never had and treated me like part of the family. He gave me expensive gifts, like bracelets and clothes from brands I didn't even know about at the time. For a child, that was magical. But looking back, I understand that these things were never a real gift. Growing up so close to him seemed like a dream, but over time, I began to realize that this dream had a dark side. Not all parties were happy, and not all smiles were sincere. Diddy and his friends, men I saw as idols, began to watch me in ways I didn't understand. They were always too kind. They asked too many questions about my life, and I felt a strange feeling whenever I was alone with them. I was still too young to fully understand what was happening, but even at that age, something inside me knew something was wrong. It wasn't just the glamour. There was something dark in that world, something that I still couldn't fully see, but that was about to reveal itself. At the time, I trusted my father. He was my hero, my safe haven. But that confidence would begin to be shaken as the years went by, and what I discovered afterwards marked me forever. As I got older, my closeness with P. Diddy and his friends began to change. At first, they treated me like a curious little girl, someone who ran down the halls of mansions and asked innocent questions about their glamorous lives. They gave me nicknames, laughed at my jokes, and showered me with gifts. But when I reached 12 years old, I started to notice that the way they looked at me had changed. Diddy started asking me to be close to him at events, always by my father's side. He said I was special, that I brought luck. But at the same time, there was a strangeness in his voice, as if his words had a weight that I didn't understand. His relationship with me seemed to change when no one was looking. When we were alone in a room, or he passed me discreetly at a party, I felt something strange in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. There were also dark rooms. That's what I called the places he and his friends took me sometimes during these parties. They asked me to accompany them, always using a friendly tone, as if it were a joke. These rooms were away from the loud music and bright party lights. They were silent, dark places where the atmosphere was heavy. At first, I didn't know why I was there. They laughed, asked me questions, and said things I didn't understand. But over time, the touches began. The innuendos became clearer, and the laughter seemed to turn into something more disturbing. When I tried to escape or move away, they would say things like, "It's okay," or "It's just a joke." I was just a child. I had no idea how to deal with that. I told my father everything. Every time we came home from one of these parties, I would tell him something was wrong, that Diddy and his friends were doing things that scared me. He listened, but never looked at me. "You're exaggerating, Jasmine. They are your friends," he said. Or worse, he would pretend not to hear me, quickly changing the subject. I didn't understand why my father didn't believe me, but now, over time, I realized that he was scared. Fear of losing my job, fear of facing Diddy. He made a very good living, and we lived a comfortable life because of it. But at that time, I only saw a father who chose money over protecting his own daughter. And so, I started keeping everything inside myself. My father wasn't going to help me. I had no one to tell. I was alone, and that feeling of loneliness was almost as terrible as the dark rooms. As the years went by, the relationship with my father became more difficult. I always admired how hard he worked to provide for us. He drove for Diddy day and night, fought Los Angeles traffic, worked overtime without complaining. He said it was for me so I could have everything I needed. But after what happened at so many parties, I started to see it differently. I still told him what Diddy and his friends did. I told how they took me to those dark rooms and how scared I was. But every time, he reacted the same way. He pretended not to hear, said I was making things up, or simply changed the subject. When I cried or insisted, he got angry. "Jasmine, do you know how hard I work for this job? Please stop this," he said. The worst part was that I knew he understood what was happening. I saw it in his eyes, in how he avoided looking at me directly when I talked about it. He knew. He just didn't want to admit it. I think he was afraid that if he faced the truth, it would mean risking everything. His job, his salary, our home. Over time, I stopped counting. I stopped trying. I felt like a burden to him, like my pain was an inconvenience he preferred to ignore. So I started keeping everything to myself, but it suffocated me. It was like a weight was crushing my chest every time I came home from a party or event. And the worst thing was knowing that, even at home, I wasn't safe. My father began to watch me more closely, but not to protect me. He said I was getting into trouble and that I needed to be more obedient, be grateful for the things we had. I didn't understand how he could think like that. I was just a teenager. It wasn't my fault, but he made it seem like it was. I felt betrayed. How could he allow this to continue? How could he ignore what was happening right under his nose? Even today, I wonder if he tried to protect me out of fear or convenience. I guess I'll never know. His silence was deafening, and he left me alone at a time when I needed help most. The father I thought would be there for me always chose the comfort of financial security. I couldn't trust him. I couldn't trust anyone. Little by little, I began to plan how I could free myself. But back then, I was just a scared teenager. And while my greatest hope ignored me, I felt like I was trapped in a cycle from which I would never escape. When I reached 14, things only got worse. Diddy and his friends kept calling me into the dark rooms at parties, but now I had a better understanding of what was going on. The innocence I had when I was younger was disappearing, replaced by a sense of despair that seemed to grow every day. I started to withdraw emotionally, avoiding conversations, parties, anything that would put me on that path. But that didn't matter. Diddy had complete control over my father, and by extension, me. He gave orders, and my father obeyed without question. Even when I begged to stay home, my father said I had no choice. "It's work, Jasmine. You need to understand," he repeated. Their control over my life was suffocating. I couldn't leave the house without telling my father. He said it was for my safety, but it seemed more like a way to make sure I was always within Diddy's reach. My school life began to be affected. I had trouble concentrating and my grades plummeted. When teachers asked if something was wrong, I made excuses because the fear of telling the truth was greater than anything else. Diddy started sending me gifts directly. Expensive clothes, jewelry, even a new cell phone. In front of others, he acted as if he were a generous godfather. "I want you to have the best, Jasmine," he would say, always with that calculated smile. But I knew these gifts had a price, one I never wanted to pay. The worst part was how my father reacted to it. He told me to be grateful, to accept the gifts without complaining. "Do you know how many people wanted to be in your shoes?" he said. But all I wanted was to escape. As the years passed, I began to feel like my identity was slipping away. I was no longer Jasmine Clarke, a girl with dreams and hopes. I was just the driver's daughter. A piece in their game, something they could manipulate and control as they pleased. No matter how hard I tried to find a way out, it seemed like all the doors were locked. I was under the constant gaze of my dad and Diddy's people. I was afraid of trying to escape and failing because I knew the consequences would be dire. At 16, I started thinking seriously about how to escape. But I knew that for that, I would need time. I would need to be smart, patient. I would need to wait until the right moment. Until then, I had to hold on, even if each day seemed like an eternity. After fleeing to Canada, my life changed, but not in the way I expected. Despite being physically far away, the memories of what happened to me continued to haunt me. There wasn't a night that went by that I didn't dream about the dark rooms, their voices, the whispered threats, and the cold stares that seemed to pierce my soul. I could barely stay alone in a room with the door closed. Every time I heard a louder sound or someone knocking on the door, my body froze. It seemed like at any moment, Diddy or someone in his circle would show up to take me back. I had constant panic attacks, cried for no apparent reason, and felt like my mind was trapped in a cycle of fear and anguish. My grandmother tried everything to help me. She took me to a therapist who, for the first time, made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Explaining everything that happened was a painful process. I felt ashamed, as if it were my fault for having experienced all that. I constantly asked myself, why did they choose me? Why didn't I fight more? But the therapist made me understand that none of it was my fault. She explained that they used their power and influence to manipulate me, isolate me, and make me believe I had no way out. That was their game. Break the person until they had no strength to resist. Even so, recovery was, and still is, a long road. Little by little, I began to understand what happened to me. I remembered things I had buried in my mind, moments when I felt like an object, a piece they could use and then discard. The worst thing was realizing that, while I was suffering, these people continued living their lives normally. They were still on stage, winning awards, being idolized by millions of people around the world. Every time I saw Diddy's face in a news story, my body shook. The same was true of his friends, people I saw being celebrated as if they were untouchable. I started to feel afraid to even tell my story. These people's power wasn't just about money or fame, it was about controlling the narratives, making the world believe they were heroes, while their victims remained invisible. One of the hardest moments was when, months after running away, I received an anonymous message on a messaging app. She said, "Do you think you can run away? We always find a way." I deleted the message immediately, but the fear that it was true stayed with me. At 19, I tried to start working at a local store to support myself, but every new customer that came in felt like a threat. It was as if each person was sent by them to find me. I couldn't trust anyone. It was around this time that I started having problems with my reflection. Every time I looked in the mirror, I felt like I was seeing someone who wasn't me, a fragile, broken person who would never be able to overcome all that. But with the help of my grandmother and therapy, I began to realize that these scars were a reminder of what I had survived, and that despite everything, I was still here. Even today, there are bad days, days when I can't get out of bed, when it feels like the weight of my past is going to crush me. But there are better days too, days when I remember that I escaped, that I'm alive, and that they can't touch me anymore. These days are my hope that one day the memories won't be so heavy anymore. When I first decided to tell my story, I had no idea what to expect. I was in a therapy session when my psychologist encouraged me to write about what happened. She said it could help me process the trauma and perhaps help others who have gone through something similar. After weeks of writing and deleting, I gathered the courage to post my experience on an anonymous internet forum. The text was long, detailed, and each word seemed to rip out a piece of my soul. The initial support was overwhelming. People saying they believed in me, that I was brave, that what happened to me was an injustice. For a moment, I felt heard, like my voice finally mattered. But soon came the hate messages. Some people called me a liar, saying I just wanted attention. Others insinuated that I was trying to take advantage of Diddy's fame. One person even commented, "Why didn't you tell me before? It seems like you're trying to cash in on it now that it's on the rise." Those words cut me deeper than anything. The worst was when a tabloid found my post and published an article with my name and a childhood photo of me. I hadn't authorized any of this. My face was now linked to the story on websites and social media, and the reactions were even more intense. I saw people attacking me, defending Diddy, and even making jokes about dark rooms. "She probably wasn't even forced. She just regretted it later," said one comment that made me cry for days. Still, I refused to erase my story, because despite everything, other messages also arrived. Other abuse victims, some of them mentioning the same names as me, began sharing their stories. This gave me the strength to continue. Still, the fear never completely went away. I knew I was facing extremely powerful men. I had nightmares that they would find out where I was, that they would break into my house, that they would make me disappear like they had done to so many other girls. Paranoia followed me around every corner, every move. My father also found out about the story when it was published. He tried to call me several times, but I didn't answer. What would he say? "I'm very sorry"? That wouldn't erase the years of silence, of abandonment, of leaving me alone to face all of that. No, I didn't need him right now. The hardest thing is that, to this day, some people still don't believe me. They say I'm exaggerating, that this can't be true. But the truth is that I don't tell them my story. I tell those who know what it's like to feel trapped, like there's no way out. To them I say, I know it seems impossible, but you can escape. You can survive. I carry this burden every day, but I choose to use my voice as a form of resistance. Because silence never helped me. It only fueled their power. Today I try to find peace, but I know I will never be completely free from what happened. The marks are there, not just in my mind, but in the way I relate to the world. I don't trust easily. I avoid crowded places, and the idea of being around someone famous makes me feel sick. Still, I'm alive, and that's something no one can take away from me. After telling my story, I knew I couldn't stop there. Even with the fear of retaliation, I felt I had a greater obligation to help other girls and women who, like me, felt silenced and alone. I started collaborating with organizations that fight against abuse and trafficking, and I even gave talks, always with my face partially covered. It's not about me, it's about the message. Still, the path was not easy. The threats continued. I once got an email saying, "You should have kept quiet. You don't know who you're dealing with." I was terrified, but I didn't respond. I deleted the email and continued. The hardest thing is knowing that, despite everything, these people are still out there. They still have influence, money, and the power to manipulate narratives. I know Diddy and other men like him will probably never face the justice they deserve. It revolts me, but it doesn't paralyze me. Today, I also think a lot about my father. He never reached out to me personally after I published my story. I think he knows his words wouldn't be enough. Sometimes I wonder if he lives at peace with himself or if the weight of the choices he made has finally caught up with him. I want to forgive him, but I can't. Not yet. Despite everything, I have decided that I will not let my past define who I am. I continue in therapy and work to transform the pain into something that can help other people. I'm not going to lie. There are days when I feel exhausted, when I wish I had never told my story. But then I get messages from other victims. People who say my courage inspired them to seek help. This gives me strength to continue. I still carry a deep fear. I always wonder if I'm being watched, if one day they will try to silence me forever. But until then, I'll keep talking, because I know that silence is their greatest ally. My story is just one of many, but if it can light the way for someone else, then all the suffering will not have been in vain. I chose to survive. And as difficult as it is, I choose to fight every day for justice, not just for myself, but for all the victims they tried to erase. I know that one day their power will crumble, and until then, I will do everything I can to let the world know the truth.